Since February this year, Japan has a new prime minister, and her name is Sanae Takaichi. And she ran on three things. She will revitalize the economy, strengthen national defense, and most importantly, she will curb immigration. See, immigration is an extremely sensitive topic in Japan. I mean, this is a country that for 3 centuries was completely isolated to the world and really only opened up since after the Second World War. And now, a lot of people are seeing what's happening in Europe and America and thinking that we don't want multiculturalism here. And we don't want tourism either. Because you see, tourism has also increased rapidly and is now the highest level in Japanese history, with over 40 million people visiting the country yearly. So, why does Japan have immigration in the first place if people are so against it? Well, it's also the country with the fastest shrinking population in the developed world. So, for the longest time, the LDP, or the Liberal Democratic Party, has been forced to take in migrants to fill all the open jobs. But, as you can guess, Japanese people haven't been very keen on this. Sanae Takaichi has had an over 70% approval rating for a really long time, and even though the economy is still very sluggish, she still holds a very high approval rating. People just love her message on immigration. So I thought it would be a really fun thought experiment to see what would happen if she actually managed to curb immigration completely. And there are two areas which would be hurt the most. So the first issue is pensions. And as you could guess, it's a big problem to have an aging population without any immigrants. Because yes, whatever you think about immigration, working immigration provides money to the Japanese tax system. And with those people gone, the Japanese pensioners will have to rely on fewer and fewer people of working age. In fact, as early as 2030, if immigration gets curbed completely, we'll have around 60% of people in this country relying on 40% for their income. That is insane, and that has never happened in history. So, how can Japan deal with this without taking in immigration? Well, there are really two options here. One is to increase income tax, which is very unpopular in a country in Asia with one of the highest income taxes already. And the second one is to lower pensions. And that is also very hard because the majority of people who vote are already retired people. But Japanese people are more pragmatic than the French, let's say. There's been very few demonstrations against the pension system that keeps on shrinking. And this might be the saving grace. I think what we'll see is a slow increase of the retirement age, so that working people basically have to work until they're 70, then maybe 75, and then maybe up to 80. And basically what this does is, sure, you're probably not a good worker at 70 or 75, but at least the government doesn't have to pay you pensions. Win-win, right? The second thing they can do, which will affect pensioners, but not that directly, is to keep inflation relatively high. The pension system in Japan is tied to inflation, but not that much. If we have inflation of around 5 to 10% annually, that is higher than what likely the pension will be increased by. Meaning that we'll see pensions getting lower and lower, probably more and more pensioners becoming homeless, maybe resorting to crime, etc. But it's basically a necessary evil for Japan to have zero immigration. And maybe a lot of retired people are willing to live with this in exchange for the Japanese culture staying intact. Now, on to the second mega problem that Japan will face: an emptying out of Japan. You see, the thing that happens when a population is shrinking is not only that everybody gets older, it's also that a lot of people die every year and not enough people are born to replace them. What's interesting here is that data shows that this will have a very strange effect on Japan. First, as you could guess, around half of the country will be emptied out, meaning around half of all the municipalities today in Japan by 2040 or 2050 might be completely gone. But the second thing that's very interesting here is that if we curb immigration today in Japan, you'll likely see an acceleration of people moving from the countryside to the cities. And this is because a lot of the reason why the countryside and why farms and why factories are able to sustain themselves is because of increasing immigration in Japan. And if that disappears, that means that the people living on the countryside today have no choice but to move to the bigger cities. So, for a short time, we could actually see bigger cities grow faster if we curb immigration. This is not great, but at least it's kind of a vision that maybe Japan as a whole will be worse off, but some cities could survive and thrive. And that includes my city, Tokyo. So, if we curb immigration, it will have a huge effect on retired people and any countryside municipality that isn't growing today. But in exchange, we'll get a preservance of culture and perhaps a Japan that old people will recognize when they're about to die. I don't know which side is the right one, and I don't know if immigration itself for Japan could be so bad in terms of changing culture or maybe changing crime rate as people are very worried about or changing religion, etc., that it's worth keeping the status quo. But I do know that economically, there will be huge consequences. The question is, are people willing to swallow those consequences for a more pure Japan?